Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar today, Communicating Your Superpowers. I'm Gail Cormier, the Project Director of NASDAQ, the Family Center of Excellence. When we equip families to take person-centered approach to communications, it creates opportunities for each person to determine for themselves what their core values are, what their communication styles might be, but most importantly, it equips the family to assist their loved ones to evoke their own ideas and strengthen the relationship in the process. Before we start our jam-packed presentation today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with the PowerPoint presentation, slides, and any additional resources will be uploaded on our events page after the presentation. And everyone who is signed in and registered in Eventbrite will also get a copy through Eventbrite within 10 days. All attendees will be muted for the presentation portion of today's webinar. However, we still look forward to hearing your questions, and we're happy to help you with any technical issues. Today's presenter has asked us for you to just ask questions as the presentation goes along. If you put them in the chat, someone will read them to the presenter, or the presenter will see them herself, and she will answer your questions as we move along. We'll be watching that chat every day. If time allows, we will unmute and you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You can use the raise your hand button. When you leave this webinar, you will be redirected to complete a short feedback survey using the link provided. This survey will help us continuously improve our webinar, and it also fulfills our SAMHSA funding obligation to provide them with important data required by our contract. Please note, all information will be confidential, and we will respect your privacy. We do not offer CEU credits for our webinars, but you will receive a certificate of attendance immediately after you fill out that survey. So when you leave today from Zoom, you'll go right into a survey, fill out that survey, and it'll take you right into the certificate. I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you for joining us. We do have a change in presenters. Pam Lanhart, our scheduled presenter, had a family emergency and cannot be with us today. We wish Pam and her family well, and we're sending positive thoughts their way. At this time, I would like to introduce Lori Healy, Thrive board member and family recovery coach. Lori?
Thanks, Gail. Much appreciated. And yes, for those of you that may know Pam, just sending her well wishes for her family. She and I do a lot of work together, both on a personal level with family coaching, as well as Thrive Family Recovery Resources, of which I'm a board member. So I'm so grateful for all of you that have decided to take the next hour and a half to spend your time with me talking about families and talking about how families recover together. So thank you so much. I'm going to get my presentation shared here, so bear with me. All right, everyone can see my screen. Wonderful. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about me today before we get going here. Just like all of you, I come to the table with a number of different roles. So as I like to say, the many different roles I'm bringing with me today are mom, wife, sister, daughter, friend, entrepreneur, coach, leader, colleague, and contributor. And throughout the day, we all step through different roles and wear different hats. And those are the way that I view the world in many of those different roles. And from a professional perspective, I have my own coaching and education business where I am a family recovery coach and interventionist. And I work specifically with family members that have a loved one either impacted by active addiction or also navigating early recovery. And it was really important for me to pair my lived family experience with addiction in my family with, the certifications and the credentials that I believe are important to do this work. So for those of you that are familiar with the work of craft, I am a certified craft practitioner as well as a certified peer recovery specialist and coach. I also became a certified Arise interventionist this past year, which is a very family-centric way of doing compassionate and loving interventions. And then I do a lot of work with the Invitation to Change curriculum, which is out of the Center for Motivation and Change on the East Coast. So these are the different modalities that I use in my work, really wanting to make sure it's family-centric and that we are pairing data-driven and evidence-based information with love and compassion and understanding. So that's a little bit about me and the work that I do. I always like to kind of put a face on who I am as an individual. So this is my family, my husband, Tom, and our son, Owen. This picture was taken a couple years ago, so now he's almost as tall as my husband. But that was us on a recent trip a couple of years ago. Actually, we took a year and lived in our RV and traveled throughout the country, hitting 28 states. So it was so fun for me to see where everybody is joining in from, because I'd be like, oh, North Carolina or Austin, Texas, or, California. Just brought back all these great memories of all sorts of places around the country. I could talk for that for about an hour and a half, but that's just a little bit about me. I live in Minnesota. It's been an unseasonably warm winter, so I've been actually able to get out and run the trails a little bit, and just kind of in our proverbial backyard here too. Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. So as soon as the ice is melted on our lakes, I'm usually out on a kayak or paddleboard. And then that's my dog, Rio, in the bottom right corner. I'm totally in love with my dog. So for those of you that are pet owners, you can probably relate on that level too. But that's just a little bit about me and my family and how I spend my time when I am not doing family recovery coaching work. So today, as we step through this presentation, I am going to put a lot of information in front of you, which is why I'm glad it's recorded. So if there are concepts that you want to go back and listen to and understand in more detail, please do that. There's a lot that we'll go through today. But our learning objectives for this presentation are really looking at why families matter, and they matter so much. And we'll talk about some of those concepts. Looking at the narratives that actually undermine what effective change can look like. Understanding what we call our communication superpowers. Sometimes I like to say 70 to 80% of the work I do is coaching people on different communication styles. And how can we encourage our person to make maybe a different decision? Or how can we show up with more understanding in our own roles so that we can be effective in the change that we want to see? We'll talk about what change talk looks like from our person. And then we'll also spend some time talking about ambivalence, this whole stage of ambivalence, when we want one thing or we want two things at the same time, and how that impacts the decisions we make. And then finally, self-compassion. This is a really important area that as family members or people who are supporting family members doing this really important and sometimes challenging work, we need to be able to bring that as a tool into our toolkit in order to effectively show up and keep going. So we'll talk about that too. I will try to keep my eye on the chat, although I'm also doing the slides myself, so we're going through a lot of information. But Gail, please feel free to jump in if there's a question that comes up relevant to that topic, and I will try to address that. So I want to talk a little bit about addiction and the family. These are really important statistics to understand because it speaks directly to the impact that the family can have. What we know to be true today is that there are 40.6 million people in active addiction in the United States alone. And that number was actually updated just about a year ago. It jumped from around 23, 24 million up to 40.6. And we know that because of COVID and the pandemic and things that have happened. So we have had this unfortunate explosion of people impacted by addiction. Now, if you look at those numbers, for every one person with a substance use disorder, 4 loved ones are negatively impacted. And we actually believe that number is a little bit low. We think it could even be more like 5 or 6. So if you do the math there, Just think about that. 40 million times 4. We're looking at 160 million loved ones. These are family members, friends, maybe colleagues, peers that are impacted by somebody that they care about. So those are big numbers. The other thing that we know to be true is that when just one person can start to change the dynamic in their family, maybe it's the way they talk, maybe it's a boundary they set, it actually starts to change the whole entire family ecosystem. And a visual that I like to use for this is one of those mobiles that hangs over a baby's crib. When you just touch it ever so gently, the whole thing starts to move kind of in conjunction with one another. And that's kind of what starts to happen in a family as well. So we've talked about addiction in the family. I also want to talk about the recovery in the family, because those are the places that we want to put our hope. We know that people choose recovery every single day. And currently in this country, we have 23 million people that have chosen to follow a recovery pathway. And the other interesting thing about the data that's out there, and this is through the Arise model, is that when families themselves, so we're talking about the whole family system, when people are coming together and meeting regularly and talking through some of these issues and getting their own support, that after 1 year, 71% of those people of concern, the people that are loved, are still sober or have reduced use. So I like those statistics a lot. When we can engage the family as early as possible upstream, it tends to have better impact over time. And this is probably one of my favorite stats, is that just one healthy family member has the same impact of 5 clinical professionals. Now, that's not to say we don't need our clinical professionals, because we absolutely do. But there is so much power in the family being equipped with these tools and skills. We like to say that the families are really, they're the first responders. They are on the front line of what's happening within their family. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about why that's important and why families matter. If you think about, even when you go in to see a doctor, maybe if you're the parent and you've brought a child in, and the doctor starts asking questions, you are the one providing all that information about their health symptoms and how long it's been going on. The same way that we treat other health diseases is how we want to take a look at the disease of addiction. Families are an extremely valuable source of support for the management of that illness, because they are able to say what's been going on. Has there been a reoccurrence of the disease? How long have they been struggling? What's been going on in their life? So families are able to bring that to the table. We can't do that as professionals, but families can. They're also the primary source of many health-related beliefs and behaviors. So I like to ask this question, and you can even just use the chat a little bit if you want to share. But I like to say, when you were growing up and you experienced the common cold, how would your parents or caregivers treat that common cold? What did that look like for you? I know in my own family, it was chicken soup, 7-Up, and laying on the couch and watching TV. Like, that's what we did when we had a cold. I've heard other people say, oh, my mom would get the Vicks out. And that was, I remember the smell of the Vicks Vapor Rub. But what are some of the things that your family would bring into its system when you were feeling sick? So just start sharing some examples, if you would. And it's kind of fun to see what other people bring to the table. And that's because it's been heavily influenced by our culture, our heritage, where we grew up, who the caregivers were for us. So those are really, really important things. And when we even think about, multiple pathways of recovery and different types of treatment, we want to be making sure that we really understand a lot of the cultural dynamics and generational patterns that our clients come to the table with. Simply put, families care the most. I mean, they stand to lose the most and they stand to gain the most. So they really do care. And yes, we see families that come in completely dysregulated and sometimes throwing their hands up saying, I don't even know if I can do this anymore. But honestly, when we hear, I'm done, or that's it, I think what I'm really hearing is somebody say, I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know how to do this anymore. And so what we need to be doing is being able to equip those people with the tools that they do need, because they do care and they do love their person. And then finally, we know that they also have the most regular contact with their loved one. And this goes back to reaffirm that, families they have the most information, they know what's been going on with their family. And when we are in touch with our person, we are able to impact what decisions they're making in some cases or what they're going to do. Okay. So one of the things that's important to address too is that there have been some narratives out in our society where families have kind of been told, you know what, when it comes to addiction, there's really nothing you can do. And I still come across this with a lot of the families I work with. I believe that narrative is changing. I believe that organizations like this are committed to making change using person-centered language. We have to make sure that those negative narratives are really stopped, because we know that in this day and age, letting somebody hit rock bottom can be death. And so we need to be able to take some of these common conditionings and some of these narratives and start to change it. We need to start to flip the script. So instead of telling families you can't make them change or you're powerless, you just don't have any control, we want them to know that actually you do have a lot of power and you do have the ability to impact your loved one's substance use disorder. Go back to the stat around one family member, one healthy family member can have the impact of 4 or 5 professionals. To me, that's pretty powerful. So this is the narrative that we want to start to switch. These are the truths that we want to be putting into the lives of the families. There are many things that you can do because you can help create that change that you may want to see. And we're going to talk about those superpower communications. That's a big way that we can do that. So we can empower our loved ones. We can give them agency in their decisions. We don't have to tell them what to do. We can encourage them to think about what they want to do. Now, these skills take time and they have to be learned. And so you're going to hear me say a lot today, it's practice, practice, practice. And I always like to say, practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes permanent. These things that we practice over and over come a part of who we are and how we want to show up. This is a really famous quote by Johann Hari, which many of you have probably heard about before, that the opposite of addiction is actually connection. And if you haven't watched Johann Hari's TEDx presentation, I would highly encourage you to go out and listen to that. It talks a lot about the power of connection where addiction is present. We know that the disease of addiction thrives in isolation, not only for the person of concern, but also for family members. And so we know when we can be in connection with other people, that leads to relationship. We need to be in relationship with people if we want to make an impact. And when we are in relationship and in a healthy relationship, we have influence. So just think about even the healthy connections that you have in your own life, whether it's professional or in the family or areas of your life where when you have a healthy relationship with somebody, a friend, I mean, think of the impact that they have on your life. So just this is all to reaffirm that if you are a family member here today, or if you are professional supporting family members, I want you to walk away with this, that you are the very best person to help your loved one for so many of those reasons that we already went through. Okay, Gail, any questions that I can address up to this point?
The chat is going wild. Everyone's comparing this to when you're physically ill and how that works. You raised some amazing points, especially that's the percentage of 71% if the whole family is engaged.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that comes from the ARISE model. So I had mentioned earlier that I do ARISE interventions. If you want to find out more about them, go to their website. But what they're really doing is they're looking at this concept of whole family healing. I think, for a long time, the family was not included in the treatment process. And in some cases, they still aren't, depending on where you're going or what information that you're getting access to. Here's the other thing. 90% of people don't seek traditional treatment. So that leaves 10% of people are, 90% of people that aren't getting access to that. So that's why the family is on the first line. They have to be equipped. But when we can take a look and have an approach and a process that says, hey, yes, we are worried about our loved one that's struggling with addiction, but let's talk about how this has impacted mom and dad and grandma and the brother and the sister. Everybody has been impacted and has some level of what I would say trauma based on what's going on. And some of the work that I do with families is we start creating a genogram, which is also known kind of as a family of origin map. And it starts to take a look at what's happened in the family, not like what's wrong with this person, but let's take a look at what have been the transitions in a family. What generational patterns do we see? So we start pulling out strengths and challenges in the family, and we take a look at that to come up with a picture of how did we get to where we're at today? And how can we use the resiliencies of the family that's all sitting here in front of me to move forward in recovery? How can we build on those strengths? And when families start to understand the power of that, and they are starting to have weekly conversations and they're addressing hard topics that they haven't talked about in 20 or 30 years or maybe generations, you start to see the family start to heal. And like I said, it takes time and it takes practice, but the data shows that it's extremely effective.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep moving on. We're going to talk a little bit about creating safe spaces. And like I said, I'd like this to be a little bit interactive. And so you can use the chat if that's what you're comfortable with. I know sometimes on these types of webinars, people can't talk openly or freely based on where they're at or who they're with. So you can use the chat, but I may call on a couple of people to talk about what this means. So let's think about this concept of safe spaces. And we've heard this language used quite frequently lately. But what does it mean to create a safe space? I want you to think about a recent situation with, it could be a friend, a boss, a partner, or someone in your community where you wanted to process something important. And they took the time to create space for you. They took the time to listen to you. What did it feel like for you? Or maybe you haven't had this experience and that's been hard. So I just kind of want to think about, what does that look like for everybody?
I see a lot of comments about trust
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep,
developing
absolutely.
relationships,
The
ensuring
privacy,
privacy.
listening. Yeah, and we're going to actually active listening is one of the superpowers. So we're going to talk about that. It's showing up where you can kind of like inhale and exhale. No, I'm with somebody that I can trust, somebody who gets me. Or maybe if they don't even understand what I'm walking through, they're still there to give me some space. Giving permission to have a different perspective. I love that. Yeah, all of these are really good. Non-judgmental. Yep, those are great. Now, if you were to think of the flip side of that, when you haven't felt like somebody has been safe for you, what does that look like? How does that feel? Was there something maybe somebody said to you that made you feel unsafe? It's going to be the opposite a lot of this, right? Uncomfortable, hurtful, insecure. Mm-hmm.
I see
The
judgment.
anxiety. Yeah. Uncomfortable. Absolutely. Over talking. I love the interrupting and over talking. The other one I think is when somebody invalidates you. And I'm going to give you a really simple example. I'll give you a personal example. I'm walking around our house. Our house is always cold to me. My husband keeps it really cold and I always want to turn it up. I'm sure I'm the only one that deals with that, right? And I'll say like, oh, it's so cold in here. He'll say, it's not cold. It's not cold. And I'm thinking, yes, I feel cold. And so even by you saying that it's not cold in here, you're invalidating how I feel. And that's a really simple example. But think about when we're in really, really challenging circumstances and somebody's invalidating how we feel about that. I feel really hurt when you said this to me. Oh, get over it. It wasn't a big deal. That can be very hurtful. And that is when we don't feel like we're in a safe space with somebody.
Lori, I don't know if
Yeah.
Karen has changed her mind, but Karen had her hand up a couple of minutes ago and I completely missed her. Karen, do you have a question? You can say it
Um,
over the mic.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Somebody in chat also threw the same sort of thing out. I just wanted to share a quick, for me, safe space has been really a difficult concept for me because of I very often don't feel safe in spaces because I lived in my comfort zone and now I push myself to stretch. So I too like to call it a brave space because sometimes I'm going into a space knowing that I'm probably not going to feel completely safe and I'm pushing myself into my stretch zone to still participate, to still learn and challenge myself to change some of those things. And so I have to be brave to even sit in that space. So I just want to throw that out for those of us that struggle and go, well, I don't feel safe. And I know that's okay in this moment. I'm working through some things. So I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That's so good. And I love that you mentioned bravery, a brave space. That is so good. I might have to use that in the future. And that's a perfect connection to what we're talking about here with Brene Brown, another one of my favorite researchers, if any of you have read her stuff. But I want to share this quote with you. And she talks a lot about daring and being brave. The energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. That's what connection is. And when we have that connection, we are absolutely entering into safe space with people. And we'll talk a little bit about, we already kind of did this exercise, but we're going to talk about what that connection means and how we can be a safe space for our people. Here's another quote from Heather. What it means to hold space for somebody is that we're willing to come alongside another person, whatever journey they're on, without judging. A lot of people commented on judgment. We're not trying to fix them or trying to impact the outcome. How many times do we do that? When we hold space for other people, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. And I can tell you, this sounds so easy to do, doesn't it? It's absolutely the right thing. And yet it can be so hard based on what we've experienced in the ways that substance use disorders have impacted our families. So just even starting to get our head around these concepts and helping family members understand that is a huge step in the right direction. I just want to talk a little bit about the Karpman drama triangle, and we don't have a ton of time to go into it, but this is something you could Google or find out a little bit more. But the whole concept of it is, you know, when we go through some type of trauma or really challenging circumstances, we tend to start to fall into one of these three roles, which sound a little like this. The persecutor. In this mode, the person, we don't really care about what other people are saying. We're angry, we're judgmental. We come across, these are like the interrupting people and the talking over somebody that I've just had it and you don't know what you're talking about. And if you don't shape up, you know, this is going to be the next step. So that's kind of the persecutor role. The rescuer is this person doesn't really value others people's capacity to help themselves. So they don't think that person has the agency to make the right decisions. They're going to constantly hover over somebody. What can I do? Let me help you with that. Or because they want to be seen as needed. Because sometimes in the absence of being needed, the rescuer doesn't know what to do with themselves. And then also we have the victim. The victim is a person that, you know, doesn't value self, or they might defer to others. Oh, poor me. I can't believe I'm going through this again. Things are never going to get better. You know, also blaming. This is look at it's somebody else's fault. I just can't even understand why this is happening to me again. So I think it's interesting to understand each of these three modes, if you will, because one, it can be important to take a hard look at our own selves and say, do I tend to fall into one of these areas when things are really challenging and in the absence of helpful skills start to act out? Or perhaps you're working with family members and you're starting to observe or see some of these tendencies in individuals. This can be part of the whole family work to understand, like, how are people showing up for one another? When we've experienced trauma or challenging situations in our family, what patterns have emerged? And what patterns maybe have been passed down to me that are now forcing me to take a good hard look at myself to see how I might be able to show up differently. So again, we could probably talk about this for an hour, but take a look at the research around this too. So the ways that we as a family member might not be a safe person sound a lot like this. This sounds a lot like preaching, teaching, telling, things like, well, you need to do this, or you really should do this. Constantly making suggestions, lecturing, crying, begging, pleading, threatening, cutoffs. We could probably keep going on. And, you know, I admit, you know, when my brother was in his active addiction, I showed up like this because I didn't know any better. This gave me a sense of control, and I could clearly see what the outcome should be for him. And I was so attached to that I showed up in this role. And I wasn't a safe person for him at that time. This is before I learned about craft and this, you know, loving approach. These things generally don't work very well, and they just kind of tend to push us away from one another and really start to denigrate the relationship. Okay. This isn't really an exercise, but I do want to just talk a little bit about behaviors make sense here. So like I was just talking about, hey, how I showed up, that made sense to me in my mind, because I was thinking, well, if I can just impact this decision or make them do this, well, then things will be better. And so my behavior made sense in that moment. The other thing that is an important concept for family members to understand is the behaviors of our loved one making sense. So a lot of times we just see our person taking the next drink, or they've been brought into jail again, or they're making decisions about hanging out with people that aren't a positive influence on them. And we think, why can't they just stop? Don't they see what this is doing to our family? So we just see the outward appearance of what's happening. Instead, if we were to take a step back and go, I wonder why they're taking that next drink, or why they're continuing to hang out with those people. When we can start to understand the behaviors of our person that makes sense, I believe it starts to open up a lot of understanding and compassion in us. So when we know that our person uses is because they have really high anxiety, and that substance helps to soothe them, that makes sense. When our person is hanging out with people that they have a good time with, that makes sense to them. So there's a common understanding among a lot of people that work in this field that, you know, the substance was never the problem. It was always the solution for the person. Now, of course, over time, this is for a lot of people has become very problematic. And so those are the things that we're trying to intervene on. But when we understand what those behaviors are and why our person does something, it at least helps us get into their brain a little bit more. This is not saying we have to condone it or support it, but it helps us understand it. And so that whole concept of behaviors make sense is really important. And then, of course, our behaviors make sense too. When we see things that are harmful to our person or harming our family, this is where we erupt in anger. We try to control what's happening. We might swear, we're judging people, because in that moment, that gives us a sense of control, which makes sense. We want to avoid a potential bad outcome. And so we do all these things that we know aren't necessarily healthy, but in the moment, it feels right. And this is a great quote by Viktor Frankl that further supports that, is between stimulus and response, there is a space. And sometimes it's a very small space, but in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. So in that space is where a lot of this work is done. And we're going to talk about how the superpowers impact that. When we can choose to be intentional, and when we can choose to respond and act in a way that's intentional, we start to get away from the reactivity. We start to get away from the control and the judging and the blaming, and into a space that says, how do I really want to show up for myself and my person? Again, much easier said than done. But one of the ways that we can start to do that is if we're able to kind of catch ourselves in a moment of dysregulation. I always say, let's just hit the pause button. And that pause button for someone might be just a deep breath. It might be counting to 5. It might be not picking up the phone when that person calls, or it might be waiting till the next day to have a conversation. There's lots of different ways we can pause based on the situations at hand. It's also being aware what's happening in my body. We talk about like the somatic responses in our body. Is my stomach getting the butterflies? Am I just getting all clenched up and fist is tight? Do I have, do I start sweating? We all respond to dysregulating situations differently. So when you can start to be aware of what's happening in your body, that's going to allow to put you in this space of pausing and moving forward with intention. Decide what matters values. This is Pam and I talk about values all the time. It's such an important component of understanding how you want to move through situations. So understanding, what are your values? Is it, speaking with honesty? Is it being respectful in my conversations? What are the values that matter most to you? And how do you bring those into some of your most important relationships? I just talked a little bit about, responding rather than reacting, being intentional, and then asking yourself, am I a safe person? When that person is in my presence, do they want to listen to me, or do I really need to work on a restoration of my relationship so that I can have connection and influence? I think this is a pretty powerful statement. We are competing with the substances. We always want to say we can hate the addiction. Let's love our person. So let's focus on the substance as the problem, as the disease is the problem, not our person. Because when we're focused on our person as someone who's making bad decisions and not doing wise things, even though they are, if we're putting that judgment and shame on them, we're competing with them. And we want to compete with the substances. This is another really great question. And I have to use this question on myself quite a bit, especially when I'm not showing up in situations where I'm bringing my values to the table. And this comes from a story where, Pam, when she was dealing with her son in his active addiction, she was asked by one of their mentors, are we going to be right for the sake of justice? So we can say, I'm right, I told you so. Or are we going to love for the sake of relationship? Because what we know is that love always wins. But we get into either one of those roles when trauma has happened or something really horrible, someone's done something really horrible and we just want to right the situation. And we just want to, be that person that has to come out on top. But what is that doing for our relationship? So this is a really good question to ask yourselves and to have family members ask themselves. 7 desires of the human heart, when we think about being in connection with somebody, and just think, as I read through these, just maybe think of a relationship where the majority of these, if not all of these, show up for you in somebody that's really near and dear to you. We want to be heard. We want our voice to make a difference. We don't want to be cut off. We don't want to be invalidated. We want to be affirmed. We want to hear language that talks about the good stuff in us, to be blessed, to be safe, to be touched. A lot of times in this disease of addiction, we stop hugging people and they're isolated and we're isolating from them. And sometimes just a simple pat on the back or the shoulder or a hug can become so foreign to these people that we love. To be chosen. I mean, think about when we've been left out, the feeling that has. And then finally, to be included. We are wired as humans for connection. And that's why we talk so much about connection and how we can foster it with these skills. Okay, I think it's finally time to get into talking about harnessing superpowers here in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about the spirit of change talk. Change talk is really important when we are in connection and communicating with our person. When we talk about change talk, there are these different values that come up in terms of, partnership, compassion, acceptance, and evocation. These are the things that we want to be trying to encourage and move forward when our people are talking to us. And I'm going to give you some examples, but I do kind of want to do this exercise. And there's, now, Gail, do you know, do people get worksheets, or will that come out after the webinar?
They did, excuse me, they did receive worksheets.
Okay, so I think it's on page 3, 3 and 4, I believe. It's called Understanding How People Change and Responding to Change Talk. And so we're not going to go over all this information right now, but what change talk basically is, these are statements that we as family members can start to kind of hang on to and use when our person starts to say things that may be indicative of them wanting to make a change. So it's usually not something like they wake up and say, I'm ready to go to treatment today. That's not the change talk I'm talking about. A change talk might be something like, oh, I'm really tired of waking up late every day. Or, boy, my friend hasn't called me in 2 weeks and I'm feeling really hurt about that. These are things that we can, somebody's expressing pain in what they're walking through and indicating that maybe it's time to make a change. So on the next page, there's actually a typical exchange where this change talk is noticed. And so I want you in, the time that you have after this workshop to go through these worksheets because they're really helpful in understanding what change talk looks like, what it sounds like, and then how you as family members, if you're supporting family members, can use the type of change talk to encourage them or even to just be a safe space for them. So an example of what not to do would sound something like if your person says, well, boy, I'm really tired of waking up late. Probably because I was been drinking. An incorrect response would be like, well, if you would just stop drinking, maybe you'd feel better. Well, hey, that's going to teach you if you keep drinking like this, you're going to keep feeling like this. Appropriate response to that type of change talk would sound something like, so it sounds like you're tired of getting up late each day. Tell me more. So you're just meeting them where they're at and you're encouraging them to talk a little bit more about it so that you can understand what's going through their head. Okay, let's get into the superpowers here. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for the 5 superpowers. So the first one is listening with empathy. Okay. Empathy, Brene Brown does a really great video on this. If you just search Brene Brown empathy video, it's just a quick 2 to 3 minute listen. It's really good. It's all about the words that we use. What we don't say is really important. So think about just holding space for somebody, just listening. And this can be a really, really hard exercise, especially for those of us who have been in a role where we're used to fixing or we're used to people pleasing or we're used to controlling the outcome. We just want to talk over our person and tell them what they should do. If we're just to sit back and listen for 2 minutes, try that sometimes. It can be really hard for certain people. The other thing that's really important to remember are your nonverbals. What does my body posture look like? If somebody's telling me something, are my arms crossed and I'm kind of looking at them sideways? Or am I more of an open stance? My hands are in my lap, or I'm just kind of standing there. Where's my eye contact? If that person's talking to me, am I really looking at them, or am I on my phone and maybe, looking up every so often? Where are you? Is there a barrier in between you? Are you side by side? Are you in a car? Thinking about all of the proximities of how you communicate with somebody. If somebody's in the kitchen and you're in the living room, and they're trying to talk to you, but you're not willing to go in the other room, what does that dynamic look like? The distractions are just, the phone is the biggest one, let's face it, or maybe the TV's on, or, and you can say, you know what, I want to listen to what you're saying. Give me 2 minutes to finish up what I'm doing. And then you've got my full attention. So just be thinking about how can you make some breaks in what you're doing to take advantage and be that safe space for someone. And then of course, facial expressions, are we when our person's talking, are we like looking at them like this, or are we more engaged? So all of these nonverbals are really important. It's not just the listening, it's everything else that we bring to the table. And so when you can start to control your own behaviors in these areas, you are much more responsive. You are more of a safe space for that person. They feel like they might want to.
Lori, if I can interrupt, a lot of folks are asking me about the worksheets.
Okay.
In particular, can they use worksheets in their own work with their families?
Oh, these specific worksheets?
Yes.
That's a great question, and one that I would have to ask Pam about. My guess is that she might say yes with attribution, but we should double check with her to make sure.
Okay, we will send that information out when we send a follow-up email.
Definitely, because what I know on some of these actually, there's really great information that also comes out for Center for Change and Motivation. They have a lot of information on their website that informs some of the work that Thrive does, and that information can be used. But we'll get you a specific answer on these. So thank you. So let me go back to this one. All right, superpower number 2. So let's just assume you've entered into a conversation and you are listening with empathy, you have a good facial expression, you're nodding. One of the things that you can start to do is reflect and validate. And this is such a powerful exercise in helping the other person understand that they've been heard. And so these aren't really questions, so to speak. These are more statements and reflecting back what they've said. This is also a place where we don't want to minimize these feelings. If somebody just told us something and confided in us with their trust, we don't want to go back and say, oh, well, that's not true. That can't be right. You must be mistaken. That's where we're invalidating them. So we want to be really careful in this area. What we do when we reflect and validate is we kind of paraphrase or rephrase what that person has been said. It's non-judgmental. And the tone that we use here is critical. Not that you should use a critical tone. The tone that we use to reflect back the statement is really important. So let's say that somebody comes to me and says, Lori, I've been having a really hard time at work. My coworkers are just, they don't believe anything I want to say, and I'm not really sure what to do. There's a couple ways I could go in here. I could go right into fix it mode. Or I could say, oh, that can't be that bad. I mean, your coworkers, they seem to be like really good people. Or a reflecting and validating statement would sound something like, let me make sure I've got this right. It sounds like you're having a really hard time at work and your coworkers aren't somebody that they're saying you're not able to trust them, or they're not able to trust you. So just repeating back what has been said. And usually someone will say, yeah, exactly. And right there, people are like, they heard me. Yeah, that's what I said. So reflecting and validating it's pretty easy because you're just repeating back just a little bit differently what they said. Okay, superpower number 3 is affirmations. Affirmations are important in any area of our life, with our partners, with our kids, with our neighbors, anybody that we come into contact with. And I believe that we just, as a society, we just don't do this enough. We've turned into, situations into pretty critical situations. So how can we lift people up instead of breaking them down? And when we're dealing with the disease of addiction, our loved ones start to really hear a lot of negative things about them, don't they? When we get into that space of criticizing their behavior or judging something that they've been done, it's human nature because we feel hurt. And so we sometimes respond in kind that way. Hurt people. You've probably heard that before. But what if we could get really good at affirming people for the things that are good about them? And this is such a great quote by Mark Pimsler. He does some really great work in this area. We cannot be in the business of fixing people. Instead, we must be in the business of walking people back home to themselves, because I don't believe in brokenness. What I do believe in is forgetfulness. I believe the worst bedevilment a human can face is forgetting who they are. And this happens with this disease. It really does. And a lot of times family members will say to me like, oh, Lori, there's nothing positive I can come up with for my person right now. And I challenge that a little bit. And I say, let's take a look at that. Sometimes it's going back a little bit and saying, tell me what your person was like before, this disease of addiction really kind of took over. And we'll talk about that. But then really we start to get to a place where they say, well, they are a really good friend to that person, or they're really good at taking care of their dog, or I appreciate that they picked up the dirty laundry off the floor today. Whatever it is, it can be very small or it can be larger than that. But when we can affirm our person for something, it's really powerful. So there's another worksheet that you can use. It's called Make a List of Affirmations. And one of the things to do is just go through, think about somebody in your life that you're maybe engaged in a challenging situation with, and think about all the good things. We get so wrapped up in maybe all the negative things that we even forget the good things. So it can be important to even just make a list. And the next time I talk to my person about something, I'm going to affirm that for that situation. Sometimes it can be as simple as, let's say they called you and, it could be a short conversation, doesn't really matter. But even just to text them after that and say, hey, I really appreciate you called. It was great to hear from you, or whatever that interaction may look like. There's just these little things that sometimes we forget. And so being receptive and being open to what's going on helps you come up with those affirmations. Okay. This is, some of the things that you can do. Catch them doing right. Like I said, we get really good at catch them doing wrong. So when you see something positive, don't think, well, it's about time. Think, I can affirm them for that. Because when we can recognize positive behaviors and reward the behaviors that we want to see, that's what starts to foster change. And that's the whole craft approach, where we're getting out of the way of shaming and nagging and pleading. And we're actually showing up in our own values, rewarding positive behavior, and starting to encourage and foster that to move forward. That's kind of the crux of what craft is. These are other things. Make them genuine, staying away from the whole toxic positivity, like you can do anything, you're so amazing, but really more being genuine and how are they showing up day to day. Emphasize their strengths. What I know to be true about you is that you are a really hard worker. Or what I know to be true about you is you tell it like it is. So think about what those attributes are of your person that are actually strengths. Maybe you've seen them in a negative light, but they've been things that have been helpful for them. They've been able to use those strengths to be resilient and to survive and to show up. And then, of course, expressing positive regard and caring. Every human is worthy of unconditional positive regard. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind. Okay, so even just take a couple moments now in the chat. Are there, and maybe some people are really struggling with this right now. Again, thinking, gosh, Lori, I don't really have much positive that I can say about my person. Well, what is a strength of theirs that you saw in either childhood or when they were younger or something like that? What comes up for you? And, maybe write that down here and then commit to affirming your person for that today or tomorrow. Okay. And keep those top of mind because they need to hear that. This goes back to Mark Pimsler's quote. It's our job to help them walk them back to who they are. The substance it's putting a shadow over that individual that they are. Now, they didn't wake up one day with this disease. It happened over time. And so we want to be able to help them remember the great things about them. Okay. Superpower number 4. This is kind of one of my favorite ones. It's to empower. And I'm just, you don't have to raise your hands, but I just kind of wanted to ask, who out there are the fixers? Who are the people that just kind of want to come in and here's the plan I have. And these are all the things that we need to do to make sure this situation is going to move forward in the right way. I'm kind of one of those individuals. I like to have a plan. I like to have a strategy, and I can get really good at telling other people what they should do. This superpower is the opposite of that. This is where you actually step back and you let your loved one take center stage. So if any of you out there have ever raised a child, a grandchild, cared for a child, whatever that looks like, you've already practiced this skill. And this looks like letting our baby learn to crawl on their own and then walk. And then, of course, riding a bike. This is where we make sure they're safe, and then we kind of let them go. This is the whole skill of empowerment. So this is where we, like I like to say, lean back. I almost use that as a visual, just like you're going to lean back and let your person kind of come front and center. This is where you're going to let them figure it out. Instead of you telling them what to do and how to do it, you're going to use statements that sound like, gosh, I'm curious what it would look like if you're serious about taking a new job. Even if you might think it's a really bad idea, tell me more about that. Help me understand why that other job would be better than the one you have now. So open-ended questions are a really important tactic in empowering somebody. I'm wondering if you could tell me more about that move that you want to make to South Dakota. Right? Those are the types of things that you want to do with empowering, is kind of letting them figure it out. The other thing a lot of people will say to me is, well, Lori, when I ask these questions and I ask them something like, well, what would it look like to take better care of your health? They come back and they say, well, I don't know. So what am I supposed to do with that? This is where we're going to go into the next superpower in a minute. But this is where you can take that I don't know and turn it into a talking point. So don't let that be a dead end. You'll get that a lot. I don't know. I don't know. And that's because they're not used to figuring things out on their own. If in the past there's been a pattern of somebody shutting them down or telling them what to do, they haven't necessarily practiced this empowerment skill, which is why it's so important to be able to use these types of questions to get them to really think about it. So I really love the empowerment skill. And again, it's hard for us to do for those of us that are used to being in this role. I won't go through all of these, but here's some great open-ended questions that you can use in conversations or arm family members with in order to get them to use this superpower communication of empower. Okay, so what solutions make the most sense to you? Who are some people that could help support you right now? Staying away from the, the questions that would end in a yes or a no, but start to use some of these. They're really powerful. Okay, our fifth superpower is gaining consent. And one of the things, this is all about asking for permission. And so I was gonna say, one of the things we love to use this statement when somebody shows up and you can just tell they're not in a great place, they're really dysregulated, something just happened to them. What do we tend to do sometimes? Go into fix-it mode. Oh, feel better. Oh, it can't be that bad. Like we try to minimize what's going on. And I love this question. Do you need to be heard, to be helped, or to be hugged? That's like one of our favorites that we use. And it's kind of fun to see how people respond to that, because this is actually a question that really helps create a safe space for them. We are not going in with what we think would help solve the situation. We're asking them what they need and how can I help? So to go back to that example of if you've just asked an empowering question, hey, who are the people that might be able to provide you extra support in this area? And they say, well, I don't know. Here's where you can gain consent to share your ideas. It might sound something like, okay, I'm hearing you say that you don't know. Would it be okay if I offered up some ideas? And now you're either going to get a yes or no answer. And yes, that is a closed-ended question, but it's actually the next step into it. You're just asking permission. I equate this to if somebody's door in the house is closed, one of two things you can do. You can barge right in, and you can imagine what kind of response you're going to get. Or you can knock on the door and say, hey, can I come in? And if they say no, you respect that. And if they say yes, you enter. It's kind of that simple, but I like to use that analogy because if you do ask permission and somebody says no, you really do need to respect that. Maybe at this point in time, they aren't ready to be helped or they don't want to be heard by you because maybe you haven't done the steps that we talked about earlier to create that safe space. But if you've been working on that and your person feels like they are in relationship with you and they have a connection and you are a safe space, if you are to ask permission and gain consent, hey, would it be okay if I shared some of my ideas around this? They're more likely to say yes. And that's where we start to get to those really empowering, positive conversations with their loved one. When you ask that permission, it not only are you going to find out where you stand with them, but it communicates your respect for what they need. It communicates if they're ready or not to move forward in a conversation. Like I already said, if you're going to create an environment where you're likely to be heard, they're actually listening, they're practicing their listening skills when you have something to say. It's probably going to be more collaborative. Hopefully you get to a place where you can start to have very positive back and forth about the situation at hand. And here's the other thing, even if they don't say much, they're probably still listening and they're going to go back and hopefully reflect on what information has been offered, especially if you've used the non-judgmental tones, if you said it in a way that communicates understanding and compassion, okay? And like I said, if they disagree or they say no, you have to be okay with that. And that may be frustrating to you, but then that's something that you can work through. I always say we can't control our loved ones' responses, but we can control how we show up in any specific situation with practice. All right. I just want to do a quick time check. Gail.
You are good. This conversation's been excellent. So we have at least 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So this exercise, embracing your superpowers, there is a really great script on, I don't have the page numbers on these. I don't know if we put page numbers on them, but it's about halfway through. It's called Embracing Your Superpowers, Putting It All Together. And so this can give a really good example of how those skills can be used when you can actually hear it and practice it. Here's another thing that I want to remind everybody about. Take someone in your life that you trust. This could be a friend, perhaps this is your partner, maybe it's another person in your family, a neighbor. Practice these skills, because when you are able to have that conversation with somebody, you want to be ready for it. And so it takes time to really get comfortable with asking empowering questions or to be affirming people on a regular basis. So in the work that I do with families, we do a lot of role playing because I want to get them used to using these skills. So when those crucial conversations come about, by the way, that's an excellent book for anybody who is looking to navigate challenging and difficult circumstances, Crucial Conversations. When you're ready to have a crucial conversation with your loved one, you're ready to go. You've got these tools in your toolkit. You're like, I'm going to listen with empathy, and then I'm going to, ask some empowering questions. These things just, unless you're a super amazing communicator, which I'm sure there are people out there that are, these skills don't always come naturally. A lot of times we don't teach them in schools, or they're not modeled in our family. So if there have been communication patterns in our own families that haven't necessarily been healthy, how else are we going to learn these? And so it really is an exercise in being able to increase connection so that our person doesn't shut us off. So definitely take a look at those worksheets so that you can see how change talk can be responded to in a positive way. Okay. I just want to stop there and just see if there's any specific questions or reactions to these superpowers. I'll look at the chat too. Right now.
I just love the affirmation one. And I have to say, Lori, the idea of asking, do you want to be heard, helped, or hugged? What a way to really affirm trust.
Yeah, isn't it? And it works with all ages. That's why I love the question so much. So if you have littles in your life, that's a really good one to start with and kind of see how they respond. And they probably want all three. All right, let's talk about ambivalence. Ambivalence is when we genuinely want two things at the same time. So to use, again, another kind of simple example, someone might say, well, I'd like to maybe lose a few pounds, or I'd like my clothes to be a little bit looser, but I still really love dessert at night. And I want both of those things. That's very normal. It's very normal. When we're taking a look at substance use, obviously we know the stakes are higher, and it's on something like, I know I should probably quit or reduce my use, but wow, this is really, this gives me something. I'm getting something positive from this. So having to say goodbye to that or stop is actually a really scary thing. So I want both, but gosh, I'm just not ready. Ambivalence is also the stage of contemplation. So in the stages of change model, which starts with pre-contemplation, contemplation, maybe some of you are aware of the stages of change model. I don't think we have it in this presentation, but ambivalence is the contemplation stage. And people can spend a couple days in contemplation, or they can spend their whole life in contemplation. It's really specific based on the situation that they're facing, as well as the person that's there. And so this is where influence can be really, really helpful for my family member. This is where families come to me and say, they're like, I know they should, get some help, or they should be in treatment, but they say they're just not ready. They want to make a change, but they don't know how. So this is where those superpower communication skills can be really, really helpful. It's also a stage where, and this can be difficult too for us as family members, where we have to allow for natural consequences. Those natural consequences are the life teachers. They're the lessons of this world. We get so good sometimes at being the bad guy or interference because we're scared of a certain outcome, or there's real consequences on the line for us. I hear this a lot from spouses that say, like, I keep calling in for work because I'm scared he's going to lose his job, and he's my only source of income. And so that's a pretty dire consequence. Another might be, well, I keep making excuses for my daughter because I don't want to get her kicked off the soccer team. Well, we have to take a look at that and go, why am I not letting these natural consequences play out? Well, because it's probably painful for us too. So not only is there potential pain for our loved one, but there's pain for us as a family. And so it's really taking a look at this. But I always say too, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So how can we get out of the way of being the bad guy and let natural consequences play through? Again, this is where the influence matters, how you're talking to them, how you're showing up for them. What can you do with them? How can you empower them to make some decisions and not do it for them? This is another important thing, is that there is no one size fits all, especially when it comes to recovery, support. Your person has to find what works for them. Just because what worked for one member in the family isn't necessarily going to work for your family member. So you have to think about that too. So it really is being in tune with your person to understand where they're coming from. I said we were going to talk a little bit about self-compassion, so I think we have just a few minutes left to do that. Dr. Kristen Neff is one of my favorite researchers. She does a lot in the area of self-compassion, so look her up. This is really important work. Again, if you are a family member, somebody who supports family members, and just in general in life, we're all going to go through challenging circumstances. So making sure self-compassion is in your toolkit is critical. And I love what she says here. Just let these words sink in. Now, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself, and may I give myself the compassion I need. And honestly, that's really a choice, because we have challenging situations in front of us all the time, and we have to choose how we're going to navigate through that. And so by acknowledging and naming the pain, wow, my daughter has been struggling with her substance use disorder for 5 years, and this is hard. Like, I'm in a lot of pain. Denying yourself of that or ignoring it might make sense in the moment because it's too painful to walk through. And yet moving through that is likely what's going to get us through that. And so acknowledging that this is hard and not downplaying it, that's a choice between self-kindness or self-judgment. So acknowledging that this is difficult and this is going to take time. Okay. Another thing that
Lori,
happened. Yeah.
Lainey has her hand up, and it's been
Okay.
up for a little bit. Lainey, would you like to unmic?
I just was hoping to get a repeat on allowing for natural consequences. I just really appreciated you explaining that. You just said an extra sentence or two after that, and I just didn't catch it to write it down on paper, and I just love what you said. I was wondering if you could repeat yourself.
Yeah, I wish I could remember exactly what I said, but this is why we record, so that you can go back and listen to that. But the
Yeah.
whole point, of the natural consequences is for us to get out of the way. We run, interference and like, oh, I better do this so this doesn't happen. And sometimes we are just perpetuating the situation in our life, thinking it'll change at some point or get better. But we have to start to take to get real with ourselves and say, like, gosh, I may have to let this natural consequence, I may have to let them be grounded. They may have to get a DUI. There's like, we haven't even talked about safety or anything like that. Obviously, we're not going to let somebody get in the car if they've been drunk, and we're going to try and stop them. But like, there are certain things that happen in life that are real teachers for people, and these are different across the board based on your person. So I love to talk about natural consequences. I wish we had more time. It's a really, really important concept.
Thank you.
Nydia wrote that she talked to her 21-year-old about what the difference between venting and being heard was. Nydia, do you want to speak on that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. I'm like completely floored by seeing on the worksheet what it says about dating consent. I mean, I had not looked at the worksheets prior to today. And last night my son was just losing it about something. And I was just exhausted. And I just said, hey, and that's exactly what I said to him. Do you want to be heard? Do you need me to help you? I didn't say hug. He has autism, so hugging can be weird, especially in that circumstance. I said, or do you just need to vent? And he looked, and it just stopped him in his tracks. It stopped me. His reaction stopped me. And he goes, well, what do you mean venting? And so I explained, venting, you can just talk about how hard or whatever this is. I said, and being heard just means you need someone to hear you. And I said, and both of them are okay. We all do that. I said, you just tell me which one of those you need right now. And he goes, well, I guess he didn't say vent, but he continued. Then he vented. And it was helpful to me because that's how I knew how to help him.
Yeah.
All the other things I had tried for the 7 minutes prior were not helpful, even though he kept saying, help me. And I was like, I don't know. What do you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
But it just completely diffused, and it helped him get on track, like almost back on track almost immediately. And it was about homework. And then he spent 2 hours doing the homework all by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just incredible, this superpower of communicating and meeting people where they are is just, it's like you said earlier, it's hard for us as parents. It's just not how we're programmed. And then going into the whole consequences conversation, right? That's a whole other one. But a lot of this is about how we understand it, how we see our position, and what our what our ultimate goal is. And that's what's hard, right? It's because we have to look at ourselves in this situation.
So well said. And they're often in competition with one another, like what's happening and what we want to see. And so figuring out that equilibrium, and the example that you just shared, I think it was Lydia, like wonderful. Like you finally just empowered him. You were listening, and then you empowered him to figure out, like, what do you need in this moment? And where can I come up and support you? And then you had that connection. Like, that's what it's all about. It really is. And sometimes they're small moments like that. And those are the small moments that continue to build on one another. So thank you for sharing that. We do not have time to practice self-compassion right now, but you're going to practice this. This is your homework. I always give people homework. And so take a look at the worksheets, and also make sure that you check out Dr. Kristen Neff, because she just has so much good information on that. But this is where you can start to flip the script for yourself, especially just talking to people out there where you have a loved one that maybe is currently struggling, or maybe they found recovery, but you're still beating yourself up for the previous years. This is where I just encourage you to practice grace. And I know it's so hard, but being able to find even forgiveness for yourself and think like, that person that I was 10, 15 years ago, that's not the same person that I'm at today. And I've got today, and I can build on today, and I can build on tomorrow. And sometimes just even that mind shift of letting go of like the prison that we've put ourselves in and entering into a new space of self-compassion ourselves, maybe that's the work that you've got to start with. Maybe even before any of these superpowers. So being really in tune with where are you at and how do you carry this work forward is going to be really important. So I encourage you to really try and put some self-compassion into your day. And I just want to end on this slide. And this is where Pam does such an amazing job of telling her story. And so I hope that I can honor her and her son as I tell this. But this is Jake. Jake is Pam's son, and some of you may know Pam. And her story is that Jake started struggling with his substance use when he was about 13 years old. And for many of those teenage years in their family, it was filled with strife
So then
and
you would just put a different birth date?
And negativity and all of those things that made family dynamics really challenging within their household. And it wasn't until Pam had that question posed to her, are you going to be right for the sake of justice or love for the sake of relationship? Where she started to be the change in her family and said, we're going to do this differently. We love this person. He has this disease. We need to do something differently. And the whole family dynamic started to change. And where the Lazarus time comes in, I don't know if for those of you who maybe are familiar with this biblical story, Lazarus was a friend of Jesus, and Lazarus had died, and Jesus actually brought him back to life. And so Jesus and friends of Lazarus were able to enjoy this time with him even after he had died. But the tie-in here is that Jake and their family started to come back to life. A lot of times when We are walking through this as a family. We feel like we're not living. We feel like we're dying because our person is struggling and making choices that could potentially lead to their death. And so we live in fear and we live in struggle, but we can choose to live differently, even in the spite of these really challenging circumstances. And that's what Pam and her family started to do. And she started to repair the relationship with her son. Their family had this different dynamic. They had these amazing experiences. Jake found recovery. Unfortunately, Jake did lose his battle with his substance use disorder, and he died of an accidental overdose in 2021. And the way Pam talks about this, though, is that she said, because we chose to show up differently, because we chose to choose love, we got Lazarus time with Jake. We were able to stop our dying and learn to live in a way that even if the most horrible outcome would happen, we could look back and know that we loved him right where he was at. So I think that's a really important story, and Pam does such a better job of explaining it. But we really do believe that these strategies can help affect change within families. It can help you show up to be the loving person that you are for your family, and for those of you that are helping families, to equip them with these skills. So here's more information on Thrive. More information where we get a lot of the data and the information. So please go check those out. We'll definitely ask Pam how people can use this information in these worksheets in your own work. So thank you for that. I think Pam wanted me to mention this invitation to change group or staying connected. I think the best way to stay connected with Thrive, because this might be an older slide, because there's so many people all over the country, is just go check out thrivefamilyrecoveryresources.com. There's, virtual resources, there's virtual support groups, all sorts of different things there. So Gail, I'll hand it back over to you.
Fabulous, Lori. Thank you so much. Thank you for jumping in, and you were going to jump in today until the last minute. I hope this was informative and helpful to everyone as much as it was. Thank Lori again for stepping in, and thank everyone for your participation. As always, a special thanks to Dr. Linda Goggin. Follow in the recording. It will site, and you will get the presentation slides. Stay connected. Next time on March 22nd, 2024. It's 2 to 3:30. And we would love to have you there. It's called Understanding Moral Injury and the Impact in Behavioral Health Work. I'll take everyone. And again, please, as you exit out of Zoom, please go to the survey and fill out that survey, because that's how you tell us whether we can improve, if we're doing a good job, or what we need, or what you would like to hear, because we're here to help you. For a few minutes. This way you can exit and the Zoom will take you directly to the, if you exit on your own, you'll get there and it'll be a, Lori, hey, you can go. Thank you, thank you. You were
Thank you
fabulous.
so much. Oh, thank you. I appreciate everybody. If you're still on, thank you for being here and taking the time. So have a great day.
Thank you, Lori. Could you share your email in chat? You are just
Sure.
stunningly amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a minute. And I think it's also on the slide cover when that goes out. So that'll be there too. But
oh, great.
That's my email right there.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
leave on your own to the survey.
Is it over?
And
Yes, Precious.
Oh, I thought it had just started. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
The recording will be sent to registered attendees' emails if you missed it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Once we get the recording, can we share it with others? Will others be able to view it?
Nydia, you could share it with anyone you'd like. It's also, you could direct them to our website or send it on to them.
All right, thank you.
I never can finish the survey.
Why, Jerry?
I don't know. I was a pain in someone's side last time too, and it finally went through. It won't let me, it tells me that I have to sign on to Google and list my Google account or something. And so I put in and asked for either my email or my phone number. So I do both my corporate email and then my AYFN phone or my AYFN corporate phone for the agency.
Oh, no, that's
And,
odd.
and it will not let me through. I don't mean to be a bother, but
No, we want to fix this because we like surveys filled out.
yeah.
Lachelle
Well, I
or
got all the
David?
way through it until when it directed me, I think I was right at the last slide. It directed me then to the Google thing. It says your Google password. It said email or phone number, and so I did both. I did the email that didn't work. I did my cell phone, my corporate cell phone, and then the corporate number, and that didn't work.
That is odd.
Did it give you an option? I'm not sure what's happening, but this is good feedback. Thank you. Because it should, after the survey, it should take you to the certificate and you have to download it to get it. But if it's asking
I
to sign into
eventually
Google
did.
Docs,
It was it was a day or two late last time.
Okay.
Before I could actually, and I'm just printing a certificate of attendance, no CEUs or nothing.
Right.
Or my file.